Hi guys, this is Antoinette with the New York City Violin Studio, and today I wanted to show you some different violins. I get a lot of questions about how much should I spend on a violin and what should I look for when I'm purchasing one. So if your teacher can't go with you, then here are my words of wisdom. Okay, so starting out here, I have a pretty cheap violin. I got it from my local store. It says it's a Lark, made in China. It doesn't have a year. And the main thing I tell my students is you have to listen to it and also feel how it is. So when you're going to the store, you can visually inspect it. I normally don't look too closely actually until I've heard the instrument, because looks are less important to me. This is a used instrument. And as you can see, the fingerboard here is pretty marked up. It's pretty obvious that this is not an ebony fingerboard. To start off with, you don't necessarily have to have one. Anyway, you want to listen to how it sounds. So even though I like the chin rest, that's not something you would buy an instrument off of. Alright, so I would play on each string. Okay, now when I heard this for the price, which was it was like about 150. I thought this was a pretty good sound for something so cheap, so that's why I bought it. But later on, I realized that it doesn't resonate very well. So here I have my third finger on the D string, and it should really resonate nicely if it's in tune, which it is right now. It does have a little bit more than I remember, but not here. It should really be ringing out after I'm done. When I stop the bow short, it has nothing. So the other thing you want to do is play the same song on all your instruments. So let's say we have canon. Okay, so you don't have to play too much, but you get the feel for it, and you do want to get the different ranges, so you might jump to another part of the song. I'm not really loving how it sounds. The low is kind of nice, but I feel like I have to really work hard to get a decent sound out of this instrument. I also have a very cheap bow. It's probably a $30 bow. It doesn't say what kind, and it's the one that came with the violin for free. But that's the kind of bow that you would normally get with this kind of violin, which is why I decided to go ahead and play with it. So next up, this is one I bought. It was a used. It used to be rented, and a store was going out of sale, Mars Music, and it says it's a Nilling, and it's made in Romania. This is the one I travel with to teach. I think I bought it for $300, which was probably discounted, and that was about 10 years ago, so I don't know how much it's worth now. Maybe $400, I'm not really sure. And then this bow is a Presto bow for about $80 on Char Music. That's the range, the level of bow it is. So I've already tuned them. It's kind of important to have the violin in tune when you're testing it so that it does vibrate correctly. So again, I'm going to play on all the strings. It's important to really listen for the tone. Don't worry about vibrato too much when you're testing these. I know that can get in the way of really hearing what the tone sounds like. The strings are also important. I have put gut strings on this instrument to really make it the best situation. It was kind of nasally sounding, not too much of a deep sound, but with these strings it's pretty nice combo. If this were selling for $1,000 at this sound, I wouldn't buy it though. Okay, so now we're gonna play our song again. better. It's more resonant. It's not too deep. Let's go to the other part of the song. So it's better. It's easier to play on. I like to say that when you're testing, when you find the instrument that's a match for you, you should want to keep playing it. If you test it and you're like, oh, it sounds okay, and you don't really want to keep playing it, it's probably not a good match for you. Now, what do I mean by a good match? Well, let me just get my beauty over here and then continue talking to you. Okay, so a match, every violin has a different sound. Even the same company making the same model, the wood in all the different instruments are different pieces of wood, so they're all going to sound different. Additionally, when you go to a store that has used and new instruments, they're all going to sound very different. I did buy a new violin once, but all the rest of them are used. All the ones that you see behind me are all ones that I rent out of different sizes, and some of them are new, some are used. You want to break them in. But anyway, some violins have a brighter tone, and some, which is great for soloing. Some violins have a deep kind of resonant tone, like a darker sound, so to speak, and that's the one I'm holding right now, which I'm going to show you. The one that I just played for you has with the strings that are on it normally, which is anything but the gut strings, it has a pretty bright tone, which is really not my favorite. It'd probably be a good fiddle, you know. It's a nice bright sound, but that's not what I like. Okay, so we're going to test out the strings. But much better in my opinion. This violin was $2,300 at the store, plus, you know, taxes and all that stuff. So let's go for our song. Okay, let's go for the other part. Keep playing, which is why I bought it. At the store I went to, they had a lower end violins, right? So they had them in the hundreds, and then this was actually the most expensive one they had and have had to date. And it also happened to be the best sounding one. Generally speaking, the more it costs, the better it's going to sound, but you have to listen to it because it's not always the case. Also, preference plays a role. So, the other thing when I was testing this instrument, I wanted one that could really deal with the high range very nicely. So I started on E and I just played up. Maybe that doesn't come out too good in video, but this was the best sounding one. Now let's compare it to, let's go to the mid-range one. I'll keep my nicer bow here. So it's getting kind of hard to play up here. That's not a good sign. And I'm sorry to put you through this, but let's do it on this cheap one. It's already, my fingers are hurting from pressing. getting really hard to press. Then it doesn't even really come out to be a note. So I could have gone farther on the more expensive one and the mid-range one. You know, so here's the real message I wanted to get across was, if you see a violin for sale for $60, $50, it's really gonna sound really terrible. It is. If you buy one for $150, it's gonna sound pretty terrible. It's gonna sound very nasally. This cheap one here doesn't even convey really what a normally $150 violin sounds like. It also normally has, so when you can look at the body of the violin and you can see the wood here, and this is kind of nice. It doesn't look that bad. This one is also really not that bad here. Okay, it's nice. You can see it under the varnish. This one also pretty nicely done here. And people also like to check out the backs of the violin. What I'm trying to show you is that on a cheap one, they have this, I had to look up what it is, but they have like kind of this matte look to it, and it's not really a normal violin varnish, and 100% of the time those are the cheaper instruments, and you hear it, and when you touch it, you feel it feels kind of like a plastic, it's not a plastic coating, I don't think, but if you can really feel the difference. When you hold a real violin, your fingertips kind of stick to the varnish. That happens on all regular violins. So my point is, try to budget yourself for $300 if you want to make okay music. I really think that if you can't afford a $300 violin, then rent one. If you have a budget for it, go ahead and get one that's about $500 to start with. You don't really need a $1,000 violin to start with, or an $800 violin. If you're like splurging, you could do it, but a beginner is fine with $500 or even $300 violin. If you get a deal and it's worth that much and you pay less, great, even better. But if you're gonna be playing the violin for 3 months, you're really not going to want to listen to the sound of those really cheap instruments. I have seen them for 200 something, and it's not the worst sound in the world. So just keep it in mind. That's it, because I was buying a cello and I started realizing that, they're really in the low range. You have to really consider that a nice violin, a well-made violin, is going to sound better over time, and it's going to actually gain value, and it's going to continue to improve in sound because the vibrations are warming it up. With a cheap violin of poor quality, it's never going to sound any better than it did the day that you bought it. So something to consider, that you want it to grow with you. So $300 is the line I like to tell people. Okay, well, I hope that you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, and I will try to answer them in another video. Thanks. Bye.